Okay, we'll make a start. Good evening and a very warm welcome to those attending and to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. My name is Councillor Philip Corthorne and I'm Chair of this meeting. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, and copies of which are accessible online under live broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please note that they will be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. A reminder to anyone speaking today that your voice will only be audible online if the microphone is switched on. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the alarm goes off, please follow officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting points. For those in the room, please switch off any mobile devices before the meeting starts or put them on silent. Please note that councillors on the committee may use their laptops or tablets during the meeting to view the agenda paperwork. As far as masks are concerned, it is advised that those in attendance wear masks throughout the meeting, although you may wish to take these off when you are speaking. Before we go any further, we'll have some introductions, so I'll start by introducing the committee members present this evening. So to my left we have Mr Toby Little, good evening. We have from the Labour Group Councillor Jan Sweeting and Councillor Kerry Prince, the Labour lead. To my right we have Councillor Hina McQuarna, the Vice Chairman, Councillor Becky Hagar and Councillor Steve Tuckwell, who is substituting, all from the Conservative Group. Can I ask the officers present to introduce themselves, please? Starting with yourself, Sarah.
Sarah Phillips, School Place Planning Project Manager.
Dan Kennedy, Corporate Director.
Darren Thorpe, Head of Business Delivery and Market Management for Social Care.
Gemma McNamara, I'm Head of Finance for Business Partnering and Transformation.
I'm Alex Common, Director for Safeguarding Partnership and Quality Assurance.
Thank you very much to all of you. So, coming to apologies for absence and to report the presence of any substitute members.
Apologies received from Councillor Cooper with Councillor Tuckwell substituting, and apologies also received from Councillor Rodriguez.
Thank you. And any declarations of interest in matters coming before the meeting? There are none declared. Thank you. Then to receive and agree the minutes of the last meeting, and again for accuracy. So I've moved the minutes of the last meeting. Are they agreed? Thank you. In doing so, I'm going to ask Anisha to give a brief update on a couple of items that we are pursuing following earlier requests, if you wouldn't mind, Anisha, please.
Thank you, Chairman. An update was provided to members on the 17th of December regarding the committee's request for further information in relation to public health integrated contracts and COVID. Given the current situation with the pandemic, Public Health has advised that the further information requested on public health integrated contracts will be presented to the committee as part of a full report to allow proper scrutiny. This is likely to be added to the work programme for April 2022, however I will confirm. Democratic Services are also liaising with officers to arrange a suitable time for members to receive a brief update on the COVID situation in Hillingdon, and I will also confirm details of this in due course.
Thank you, Anisha. I would just make the point that given all that's happening with the ever-changing COVID situation, I think there's a limit to how far we can reasonably press health people, both within the health service and, of course, within public health for information. I think that's a reasonable approach to take, so I trust the committee are in agreement with that. Thank you. So, we've dealt with the minutes of the last meeting. Then item 4, to confirm the items of business marked as part 1 will be considered in public, and those marked part 2 will be considered in private. At this point, I would give notification of a couple of slight changes. Now, Anisha and I were conferring a moment ago. The reason for that is that Debbie Scarborough, who's due to present our first item, has been indisposed, but she's okay. She's on her way. She'll be a bit late, here by around about 8 o'clock, so we won't take that item first. The item I will take first, though, is agenda item around corporate parenting, so agenda item 8, as Alex needs to be at another meeting. So we'll take Alex first. The other thing I will notify members of is that items 6 and 7, given the very close interrelationship between those two reports, I think it would make sense for us to take them together to have an introduction to them both and to allow comments and questions as we go. So, having given notice of those things, we will move to the first agenda item that's now changed, which is the corporate parenting item. And Alex, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. And good evening, everyone. The report in front of you, I will take it as read, so I'm not going to go into great detail in presenting it, but just to say that it acts as an update and a reminder of the corporate parenting principles, which have been discussed in this committee a while back. Also gives some detail about the progress in Hillingdon against the set principles, and provides an opportunity to reflect on the role of the elected members in supporting our children, their carers, and in our borough. Just very briefly, just to say, at the time of writing this report, we were talking about, when we talk about our children, therefore looked after children, we're talking about 393 children at that time who were under the age of 18, and also over 500 children who are between the ages of 18 and 25, for whom we still have corporate parenting responsibility because they have been looked after children. It is of note in the report that there is a significant proportion of our looked after children in Hillingdon have been seeking asylum at some point in time, so they are asylum seeking children, young people. And there's also there's also worth mentioning in the from the report that for the majority of the children who are looked after by us have come into care because they suffer abuse or neglect. At the same time, just to kind of reiterate that for majority of our children, we share parental responsibility with the parents, and therefore all of us, officers and elected members, and all of us, we are responsible, and we should strive to be the best parent we can be we can be for them. Then, in moving on to the report, when we're talking about the corporate parenting principles, which are listed in the report, there's also some details around how we meet some of these principles, like keeping our children safe, and that's provided through cooperative plan, which are independently scrutinized by the independent reviewing officers. They have relationship-based practice with their social worker and their personal advisors, and they are supported by well-matched and well-trained and very dedicated foster carers or care home staff. In terms of our children's health, which again is one of the principles, we are making sure that they're receiving appropriate health assessment, health reviews, and their mental health. It's also addressed, and we're having a good working relationship with CNWL, and we have an in-house multi-agency mental health team, which are providing support to both children and their carers, and sometimes their families and the social workers or the PAs if and when needed. And also, we are very committed in Hillingdon to listen to the voice of the child. I think many of you in this committee have been at one time or another in a corporate parenting panel, for instance, and you've seen what some of our people do, and how they interact, and how they listen to, and how they tell us very clearly what they think in some cases. And we have a very active Children in Care Council, which we're very proud of, and that listens to the voice of children from very kind of young, age of 5 and 6, all the way to 18 plus. And we also involve them quite often and quite efficiently, and sometimes quite inspirationally, I should say, in the recruitment of staff, in the development of the service, and in some of the decisions we're looking at making to make sure their voices are heard. And the other thing that I will want to just highlight from this report is in terms of children's permanency, and the fact that we are striving to make sure that our children have a permanent placement, a permanent legal status, and a permanent place where they feel they can live and they belong. And in terms of doing that, we're looking at that from very early stages, because for some of the children, adoption it's an option, as soon as they sort of come into our care. And you will see from the report, you might have heard it before, that Hillingdon has received the quality mark for early permanence, and we're the only borough in London to achieve the quality mark. There is a description of what a quality mark is in the report, but basically what it says that we are dedicated and we're committed to making sure that we identify adoptive placements and adoptive families early on in the life of the child, so the delay in them moving with the adoptive family is prevented and is reduced as much as possible. So we're quite proud of achieving that this year. And then In terms of the recommendation report obviously recommends that you know the content, but I will also add that it will be a recommendation for yourselves to continue to represent and advocate for our children, for their needs, for their voices, and to take into account every time you make decisions, how those decisions could or may impact on our children in a positive or not so positive way. And at the same time, also to provide a bit of a reflection space for yourselves about what can be done more or differently or less in terms of supporting both our children, but also their carers, majority of them who are living in Hillingdon, and you're representing them. So that's the kind of very brief presentation. I'll take any questions you might have.
Alex, thank you very much. A very welcome report. I'll talk more later, but what question have you got? I think Councillor McCartney.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, for this reminder for us all. My question really is just, obviously, we take risk and safeguarding quite seriously here in Hillingdon, and I'd just like you to highlight a bit more on how exactly we do that, especially for our young people.
In terms of the safety, we all our children, we are always assessing. We are always making sure that they are safe. We're talking to them, as I said. We listen to their voice. We get them engaged. The plans, the looked after plans, as we call them. So the plans that they have, they are majority of cases are co-produced with them. So we sit down together. We have reviews. They are chaired by an independent person, by an independent reviewing officer. And the young people are always invited to attend. Many of them do, and many of them actually chair their reviews, which again, it's really good. So we make sure that what we are including in a plan are relevant to them and are reflecting how they feel. At the same time, we have reviewed, in the last couple of years, we reviewed quite significantly, and we've radically changed the way we deal with children who are missing, for instance, who are missing for placement. And we have a new process in place that's been quite effective in the last year, whereby when a child goes missing, every time they're found, they are offered the opportunity to have a return home interview, as we call it. Initially, that was commissioned out to another organisation, and they will talk to the young people. They'll try to ring them. They might talk. They might not talk to them. What we've changed to that system is that we are now offering them 3 options. One of them is not to have the interview because that's voluntary, so they might refuse to have it and can be forced. The other one is to have the interview with an independent person, which will provide for them. And the third one is to have the interview with their allocated worker, allocated social worker, PA, with whom sometimes they feel more comfortable to share what happened to them, where they've been, who they've been with, and all that information that we can use to assess the individual risk of that child and to put a safety plan in place. And it was really good to see, looking at the data, looking at the effectiveness of that I think probably 100% of the children who choose to have an interview wanted to have that interview with their allocated worker, which kind of shows that relationship-based practice that I mentioned before, and shows that trust and that bond between the social workers and the children they're working with. It's working. And just to kind of add another aspect to that, speaking about the voice of the child, speaking about the relationship with their allocated worker, we piloted a couple of years ago, just before COVID, this initiative that, as far as I'm aware, is not done anywhere else in the country, where the team manager is not allocating a social worker to a child, but what we do, we let the child choose their own social worker. So we provide them with a profile of these are the social workers, picture of them, hobbies, all that sort of, and we let them choose. And actually that worked very well in terms of promoting engagement, because it was not someone imposed on young people, it was someone they wanted to work with. So that was piloted and worked really well into one specific team, and now, as of this year, we made that available to pretty much all the children, especially our children who are in our care. So that, again, builds that relationship and provides that ability for them to talk to us, to tell us what happens to them, and for us to listen to them.
Thank you, Alex. Councillor Sweeting, I think you indicated.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for this very interesting and excellent report, and thank you for you and your team for all the work you're doing. I'm interested on the bottom of page 79, top of page 80, the accommodation our children are living in. Is it possible to have a breakdown of where these, if you like, properties are? How many of the children's homes are in Hillingdon? How many are out Borough? I know that some time ago when I was on another committee, we did have the possibility of visiting one of these homes, and it never actually materialised. So it would be interesting to have a breakdown of where we actually accommodating our children, and how far really from Hillingdon some of them are. And maybe, you know, if we all meet up at some other stage, that we could actually think about a visit.
Alex?
Thank you. I can definitely provide you some percentages, so you can kind of know where children are. I will say the majority of them are in foster placements, which is good. We do have a large number of children who are living in, semi-independent residential homes. The reason why that is specific more in Hillingdon than in other places is because a lot of our asylum seeker young people are living in semi-independent accommodation. So we'll have a high number there, but that's by design. That's not it's not a negative, as it were. And also in terms of the distance from the borough, we will always try to find accommodation, to find places for children near to where they live. The government is saying within 20 miles. For a London borough, 20 miles is quite far. However, we try to keep those placements as local as possible, because basically then that will ensure less disruption to the young people. Can continue to go to the same school, continue to see their friends, see their families, have contact, and so on and so forth. However, in some cases, as we're all unfortunately aware, they are not. Some of our children are not safe to stay in Hillingdon. They're not safe to be placed in Hillingdon because of the risk of criminal exploitation and other forms of exploitation. And in those cases, by design, we are looking for placement at a distance. So I will, for the next meeting, I will send the percentages of various placements for your consideration.
Thank you, Alex. Now, Councillor Prince?
Thank you. This is a great report, and I really enjoy the case studies. It's nice to see that the children aren't just statistics, but they're people who have lives and dreams and ambitions. I have a particular interest in unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and much of this report is quite generic, and unaccompanied asylum-seeking children will face quite specific circumstances, delays in cases. What would you say is your general feeling of how their experience in Hillingdon? We are a port authority. We have a lot of USAC as said in this report. What is their general experience?
Thank you. And yes, I agree with you about the case studies, and I agree with you about our children being children, and that kind of makes this job worthwhile, because you see those outcomes, and that's really good to see and to read. Regarding the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, I think we are one of the. We work very well with them. We are very well prepared to receive them. We are very well prepared to search for the right placement, to do the right assessment, and to put the right services in place. We're using translation every time that's required. We work with Home Office. We actually have a person from Home Office who's seconded into Hillingdon to actually work from here, so that we can kind of shorten the communication loop, if you like, in terms of communicating with Home Office, which helps. And we do have qualified social workers, qualified personal advisors who have a particular knowledge of UAS and of our legislation around immigration, around various ways of applying for asylum, and after that applying for citizenship, and so on and so forth. At the same time, we know that for many of our young people, and you ask, possibly in particular, the housing it's a challenge for them to get in. And we have a personal advisor who's a senior personal advisor whose role is dedicated to working with housing and to kind of bridging that link between social care and housing. And at the same time, I think we have dedicated managers, workers, and again, those relationships are really good. They are quite significant. Recently there's been a significant increase in terms of asylum seekers, as we all know from the arrivals in the on the East Coast, and various asylum seekers being kind of distributed to the country. I mean, at the time of writing this report, I was not. The reason why is generic because I was trying to talk about all our children, not talk just about UASC or just about not UASC. So I think if we want to have a more detailed discussion about the UASC and about the particular situation of UASC, this somehow we respond to that. That's probably a different report, not this kind of more sort of all our children report.
Thank you. I saw Councillor Haggard first, so Councillor Haggard, please.
Thank you, Chair. A good report, and it's really interesting when you're getting into it and really reading it. And one of the things I did notice, and I think that as Councillor McQuarrie said, safeguarding, we do really well here, and we're always looking for improving and how we can. So I'm just really interested, because I couldn't find anything in the report that actually had a bit of feedback from our children and perhaps how we could safeguard them better, how they thought we could safeguard them better, and actually what we could do better, which I think is always a handle to come on. Thank you.
I think it's probably more of a reflective question at this point in time, because I think one of the reasons why I've listed some of the case examples is to see those outcomes and to see the things are happening. We've learned from, we constantly listen to our young people, and we ask them to tell us, and as I said before, sometimes they tell us quite straightforward and quite sort of clear what their views are and what they think. Sometimes they find it easier to tell other people to tell us, and that's fine, because what we have in place is an advocacy service that's available for free to everyone, to all our children, our looked after children, and they access that by themselves. Majority, over 60-something% of the access to advocacy was not referred by someone. They actually went there themselves. I don't like this. I want an explanation of this. I want to understand this. There's things that I said about housing, for instance, what happens to that. There's things about, I don't like my social worker anymore, I want another social worker. Sometimes it's things like that. Other times are things that are a bit more sort of difficult and more difficult to address. As I mentioned before, for instance, the return home interviews when the child goes missing. That's why we're offering those interviews. That's why we try to speak to them, because that's how they tell us about their individual experience, so we know about that one particular child, what happened to them, and what are the kind of the push and pull factors, as we call them, and that sort of thing. However, if we listen to all of them, we get a wider and better picture across Hillingdon. And we do have a very well-functioning, a very robust safeguarding partnership agreement, which is and forum, which is overseen by our executive leadership group. Now, the executive leadership group it's three excuse me, three safeguarding partners, which is the Children's Services in the local authority, is the police, and is the CCG. And the Borough Commander is chairing that group. It's attended by the Council's chief exec, and it's also attended by the Clinical Director for CCG. So at that level, we are discussing the teams, we're discussing the trends, we're discussing what happens in the borough, what we know that happens. And we also have a very robust learning mechanism. Every time something happens to our children, they're trying to tell us something, we do have a practice development forum. That it's a multi-agency, it's social care, it's all the safeguarding partners and other partners and schools and what have you. And all those significant aspects, even if it didn't happen in Hillingdon, because we can always learn for things that happen somewhere else, those are kind of debated or discussed and then are disseminated to the entire partnership through our website and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of listening, there is a lot of reflecting, and then disseminating out again.
Thank you very much for that, Alex. I think I've got one more question, from we've got Mr. Little, if you would, please. Mr. Little, can you use your microphone, please?
Can you tell us something about giving the children choice in schooling, about which schools they go to, who actually makes the selection, and how difficult, given the capacity of the schools?
Thank you. One of the statutory things that we have to do, and I think in Hillingdon we're doing probably better than in many other places, is that each child who's looked after, they will have a personal educational plan, and that is done, is under the scrutiny and under leadership of the virtual head teacher, and we do employ a virtual head teacher, and we do have a very dedicated virtual school team. And every time a child becomes looked after, within 10 days of them being looked after, they will have a personal education plan meeting, and at that meeting a personal education plan is developed, and that includes their learning needs, that includes their learning ability. For children who are already schooled in Hillingdon, we will try to, if possible, to keep the same school, because that provides stability and provides, a level of safeguarding and provides that sort of sense of belonging. If they're, for instance, new arriving unaccompanied asylum seeking children who've never been to school in this country or in Hillingdon, what we then do, usually the first thing we're offering to them, it's a course that's called ESOL, which is English as a second language, just to make sure that they're fluent in English and they can go to mainstream school, and they can be at the right level. And after a few months of that, then they offer a college place. It's usually college because they're usually over 16, they're usually older. And so there's many options for our children, depending on the way in which they came into care and where they came from.
Alex, thank you very much indeed for your answers there. Very, very comprehensive answers, I thought, and no one else was indicating, so I'm going to sort of comment myself and wrap this up, then, if I may. I mean, obviously we're in very good hands with the corporate parenting panel, which I actually attend as an observer, because this is one of the areas that's been quite new to me, although we all have this collective responsibility. Some of us know more about it than others. And what we all want to do is we all want to exercise due diligence as best we can. I think the report is a very good one. It sets out some of our strengths, and we have many strengths, and I'm very pleased to hear about the Permanency Award. That really is good news. I'd take this opportunity to give a bit of a plug to the training piece of work that you did as well. There's no formal member development coming up until May, but the Corporate Parenting Resource Pack, it makes a good read. I recognise much of that in your report here, and I'd recommend it to members. It's not a heavy read, it's worth looking at. And obviously post-May, well, those of us that are still here look forward to the formal offer that you've put together. So thank you for that. And really that's all I have to say, to be honest. Other than thank you and your colleagues for the sterling work you do in our name for these vulnerable young people. And thank you very much indeed. With that, I will move the recommendations. Are they agreed? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Great. Okay, so that brings us on now to obviously still no sign of Debbie. So we'll carry on with the education-related papers. So, as I said before, I think given the close relationship between items 6 and 7, it makes sense to take them together. This is our opportunity to be briefed and to question and to comment formally to Cabinet around the changes to admissions and PANS for community schools. It's a worthwhile opportunity. And the other report is really to give us some more information on the October census, which we heard about at the last meeting. I think my sense is there's still more to come out from that yet, but again, such information that we have can be shared. So I will hand over to Sarah, who's kindly going to cover both of those in her introduction, if that's okay, and we'll open up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the two do link. If in fact the report on all of the school place planning update does show that in October what we saw in the end was that the total of that kind of snapshot of the census of every school continued the slight decline in primary school roles and the continuing increase in secondary school roles. But that hides the fact that we had an enormous amount of change over the total. As reported before, we'd had about 1,000 new pupils moving into the borough over the summer, but obviously we'd also had some others going by the October. And that's not even across all the schools. Some of you are governors and will know that some schools have had far more movement in and out, or just in, or more in and less out, and so on, than other schools. And so place planning as a kind of science that we can predict has got a lot more difficult, because the one thing that's clear is that the pandemic hasn't finished, and the waves afterwards of people moving, resettling, moving house hasn't quite settled yet. So we know that this will continue to be a bit of a disruption to some of our schools, but we've got some big numbers, and I think the chart on the second page of the big report really does highlight we've still got very large, there are still lots of children in our schools, and obviously more in the secondary schools than ever before, and even though the primary school numbers and nursery numbers have declined since their peak, which is obviously why we, having discussed in various committees and with members over the last few years the pockets of primary schools that had quite a lot of vacancies, and the disruption that can cause to their planning, their finances, their staffing, attracting staff, attracting parents, and at worst disruption with children having to be merged into one class from two or split up into three. And so this year we have proposed 4 PAN reductions to community schools, and that's the thing that this committee is actually asked in one of the reports to make a recommendation or comments that will be taken to comments from this committee that go to the Cabinet, which has to decide the community school changes. And then also noting that there are 5 now, I think that's more than when I saw you in October or November, academy schools proposing to reduce. And in every case, these schools, it's an operational issue, that they're proposing that in 2 years' time, parents get lots of notice that they would reduce the planned published admission number in their reception by 30, but all of them will still be large schools. They will all be amongst, and one of them in fact will still be the largest primary school in the borough and one of the largest in London, and they will all be more sustainable, and they're all quite successful in their local community. It isn't a reflection of anything specifically wrong with them, it's that overall the numbers have ebbed a bit. And of course what is sort of slightly irritating when one's trying to meet the needs of residents is that the residents move and change and their children grow older, so the needs change all the time. And it seems that movement of families can be almost like a 12-year cycle of needing of families growing up, and then there are less small children in an area, and a few years later there are more. So these changes were ones as well which very much the schools developed. Some of them came to us and we worked on them, discussed them, checked across each planning area for the total impact. The schools were very keen, the head teachers, the governors, I've spoken to most of them, and the trusts, and they spoke to their parents. Most of the schools did newsletters in the summer with a kind of informal, we're thinking of doing this, so there will be a formal consultation, and it won't affect any child in the school. All the siblings would still be able to have spaces. There would be enough to meet the needs of local children. So when the formal consultation which we've just done, when you see the second report, you might think, well, that's a bit poor because there's not many comments. But I know that in some schools, parents had some discussions. We didn't, because of COVID, actually hold public meetings, but parents got an informal note in the summer term, sometimes an informal comment in the news from the school early in September, and then the formal consultation. So there's been quite a lot of consultation, but also, of course, parents really do realise it's not affecting them. It's not going to constrain local families from being able to get a place in a local school. One of the criticisms that we did get, which was from the same person about each of the comments, was that it could constrain choice for parents. And I think one has to say that, yes, of course, in a sense that's true, but what it was about is that some of these schools have got some parents bringing children because it's convenient for work or for family relationships, which, you know, one hopes one can meet, but one can't always. We can't have spaces in schools for people to come 5 to 10 miles. But there was a particular comment, for instance, from a parent in Harefield saying, where we're with the infants and the juniors, proposing it go from 90 to 60 in a year group, saying that, you know, this was quite a worry. Was this a worry because it's a very isolated area? It's not as close to Herefordshire as I actually wrote. It's close to Hertfordshire. But seriously, the point is that at the there would definitely be, those 60 places would at the moment more than meet the needs of those people who live in Harefield. And it's about making sure the people of Harefield have a stable, secure school that can focus resources on them. There would be some places still for people to travel in to all of these schools, but not perhaps, you know, it's not, we can't operate like that, that there would be spaces in every school for anybody who might want to come from that kind of distance, at primary particularly. And in the end, we've ended up with 9 schools making reductions. That would actually be a 6% reduction in the overall reception intake. But as you know, that was creeping up over 16%, and we're aiming to get it below 10%, so it's going in the right direction. And in these cases, it doesn't constrain local residents at all, and that's what we've looked at in each individual case and over the piece. And we'll keep on looking, and as it says in the paper, the reason for long consultation is because you are constraining parental choice. And then we're going to, if Cabinet takes a decision that it does go with this, these reductions, then they're advertised this summer for people to apply for school, but for places in 23. Whereas if numbers grow and the local areas attract far more children and families again, you can increase places within a week and just have a governor's meeting or a quick meeting of the lead member, I believe. Not even Cabinet needs to actually agree on a community school to go up again. So it enables a flexibility, which is a sensible way of operating, I would say. And we have less flexibility, as has been discussed in the past, at the moment in secondary, but we are confident we will have some extra places being added in agreement with some of the secondary schools to make sure that there would definitely be enough places in our secondary schools to meet the growing demand in September 22. So it's a sort of managed, flexible use of the resource and monitoring the situation that's going on. And then we've given you the total roles of each school, and you can see the kind of variety across some of the primary schools. And then the other thing, of course, is in special, where we have had a growth of demand for special school places, and the increased use of special schools out of the borough is one of the biggest drivers of the deficit. and therefore there is a deficit plan which partly focuses on building more special school places. And we've got a long list, and I've given you it. That's got a typo as well, because it was actually 22/12/21. It wasn't another year ahead that it was written. But all the time we're reviewing and developing each project, working out what would be the kind of costs of them, and a bid has gone into the DFE, and we're expecting to have discussions with them over the next few weeks about the totality of the plan, and in some cases they might want to ask about some of the projects which we're discussing with individual schools and trusts and the DFE, and working out costings and so on. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed for a good succinct overview, which is very helpful to get the ball rolling. So, in terms of who's indicated, I've got Councillor Mkwana, I've got Councillor Sweeting and Councillor Haggart and Mr Little. And no doubt Councillor Prince at some point, if not now. So let's start with Councillor Mkwana, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Sarah, for the report. Given what we heard at our last meeting about the unprecedented levels of new applications for places in all year groups, how is this demand being managed, and what issues is it bringing up, and can you explain a bit more about how we're approaching this, please?
Well, everyone who's applied for a school, as has always been the case, has been made an offer and is settling into a school. The issue, obviously, with the schools is that some of them have lost families moving out from all year groups, and then they've gained other families moving in, or individuals, and this hasn't been the greatest time with all the for the schools to be taking more pupils in. I think as well it's been quite a stress in the upper year groups in secondary schools to be gaining new pupils, who of course now all wear uniform and masks, so it'll be even more difficult at times. But the schools are all managing it. We know that some schools have filled up more. There's a few that have got a higher roll than they've had for some years, whereas there's other schools that have had some decreases. And there's some schools that have got funny patterns where they've got one year group much bigger than others now. But such is life, and basically schools are managing, and where necessary, colleagues are giving support and advice. Indeed, and we're most grateful for your efforts and those of your colleagues in helping to manage that as well. I would add to that, Sarah. Okay, we've got Councillor Sweeting next.
Thank you. Although we've dovetailed the two reports together, and I can see that there's some links, there are some quite big separates as well, if you see what I mean. So I'd like, if I may, to sort of comment on the first report. That's agenda item 6. I think generally, we all must support what our schools and their governing bodies are saying about the need to reduce planned admission numbers. I have been concerned myself about the number of unfilled places, and I know I've mentioned this on many occasions at this committee. I think I'd like to ask the question of why we decided as a council to stop actually undertaking the bulge classes. We started doing bulge classes for primaries. I know that we did one in a particular area. I'm not going to identify that school, and it worked really well. The bulge came through rather like a sausage machine, going through the tube. The bulge class went through, and then the school had a slightly more accommodation, but then it disappeared. But what we've done, and I'm very appreciative that some of the buildings that we've repaired or we've added to have needed that, but we have created a problem for so many of our schools because of it. Even with the reductions in PAN, there are many more schools that are tipping towards that. And even with the reductions in PAN, you are still going to have accommodation, which I know is there for the surge, but it's got to be heated, it's got to be lit, it's got to be looked after. And that, when budgets are very tight, that has an issue. So why didn't we go for bulge classes? We could, for example, have gone for a bulge class surely for Hillside, where 6 million has been spent, and that extension has never been used for both those schools. That's my first question. And I'd also like to actually have concerns about a particular planning area, which is on page 40, and that's got that's got both Harling and Hillside. Now, I know that Hillside is still in the sort of maybe not secured stage of reducing, but if you reduced Harling to 60, 2 forms of entry, and Hillside goes down to 60, and if you look at the year reception year at Hillside, that's 63. Where does that leave you wriggle room? Because we know that we do need wriggle room. You've highlighted the fact that we've got this turbulence in respect of numbers. And if I look at page 41 and look at the area 5 planning area, right at Gardens you've got as 90 places. That's down to 60, isn't it? Anyway, coming back to the actual question, you know, why didn't we go for bulge classes?
Bulge classes and wiggle room, I think, is in essence. Sarah, over to you, Sarah and Dan.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. When in forecasting and looking ahead, sort of 5 to 10 years, we take into account what the forecast is telling us, and in making recommendations for permanent build rather than temporary bulge classes, that recommendation to cabinet members was made on the basis of seeing a much longer term demand. Now, what we have seen as a change in the demand is what's followed the Brexit, and now more recently the COVID situation. And so therefore it's how we do flex the admission numbers to ensure that the capacity that's available matches the demand and doesn't incur extra costs for schools. Where we have seen, or we have predicted blips, if I can put it that way, a 2 or 3 year temporary demand above capacity in the school, then we've worked with the school to put in place bulge classes. Sometimes we've not needed extra accommodation. The schools could maybe convert their music room to a class, and that's avoided spending unnecessary funds. Or we've put in place temporary accommodation for 2 or 3 years, and that's then been the accommodation that's actually been available for the full 7 years in the primary sector, from infants through to juniors. So wherever possible, we've sought to use the data to drive those decisions and recommendations.
Both your points. So there was a second one about flexibility, I think.
Well, I think I can just say briefly that one of the things about Hillside was also, of course, the very poor state of the building, which was so dire that it did need replacing. But both Hillside and Harlin have got a number of pupils who come from very far distant areas, and so they were one. But of course, they're not attracting enough of those to fill up at the 90. And therefore, again, we're quite confident that we'll have the wriggle room for local in quite a wide, more than 2 mile radius, but not for people coming from 5 miles away. It's true.
Thank you very much for that. I've got Councillor Hagar now.
Thank you, Chair. A really good comprehensive report, actually, and it's very difficult, isn't it, for us to look ahead. We can't predict. We haven't got that crystal ball. But I think what's really clear is what we need now, and that's really important, and that's what we've got to take away from this report. I've got 2 questions. One of the questions is, I noticed on the responses, we've done a good consultation. On the responses, how many did we actually send out? I presume we sent them out to all the schools, but it wasn't just put in here, so I just wanted to make that clear. We only got 5 back, or 1 blank as well. Was there a reason behind that? Was it because people, I don't know, didn't understand, or they didn't think it affected them? You know, what was the general feel we got from that? And are we confident with the way forward we're going from the consultation and the responses? Thank you, Chair.
I think so, because, as I say, the schools had already discussed informally with families over the previous year, in some cases 2 years, and also remember that every census you get a snapshot. Some of these schools have different people dropping in for a year at a time and not staying, but the schools then sent every parent a formal letter as part of the consultation and put it on their own school website, and then we put it on the council consultation page. We wrote and circulated it around all of the other schools in Hillingdon, and we wrote to all the neighbouring local authorities, so that if any of them were going to say, well, just a minute, we're about to reduce the PAN of all our schools in Pinner and this could be a problem, but in fact, you know, so nothing has come back. So there was quite a lot of consultation widely with different schools, with different local authorities, and as I say, all the parents getting something in through from the school individually, and the website of each school having it on and having a link to the council's own website.
Thank you for that. And I've got Mr. Little now. Yeah.
I'd like to ask about the special education, and you've very kindly given us all your definite plans and all your, I suppose they'd be wished for plans as at the moment, and it's good to see that there are all these plans being made. If we were successful with all of these, and I realise that's a big if, where would it place us in terms of the number of children we'd still need to be sending out of the borough? Would it be a high percentage? Would it only be those who have to go because their needs are particular? Or would it actually make a big dent in
yes,
the arrangements?
The aim is that the only pupils that would be going out of the borough would be those who need a very, very specialist provision, and so it would be a minimal number. That's the aim on the big picture. I mean, it is fair to say that that's the aim of every local authority at the moment, and very few have achieved it, but we're setting out, you know, long-term plans and discussing how we can get there. And of course, one of the other things is that when you have attractive, successful schools, you attract parents for primary and secondary and special to move into the borough. So the situation changes all the time, but we are aiming to meet the needs of everyone who lives in the borough as far as possible.
A follow-up, Chair. Go ahead. On the ones in the final table on page 67 where there aren't sides or providers yet, what do you rate the chances of getting all or any of those?
I haven't done that. I've thrown away my crystal ball as well as my gambling sort of things. But, I mean, seriously, one of the things that we're told, that there was a very large sum announced in the autumn statement of capital for the whole country for special needs new building, and myself and all the other London place planning people, we natter with each other. we think that some of that will be in the form of a new round of special school, free school bids. So we're sort of thinking that we will get ourselves geared up for that. And you can't really tell. I mean, we know that we've got a need and a demand. We've got a lot of pupils. The DFE's agreed that. That's why we're on the short list for this deficit plan to be agreed. So we've got a pretty good chance, we hope, of getting, most of what we're asking for.
Thank you. Councillor Prince.
Thank you. Do you have an update on the free school in West Ruislip and expected date for when that will be ready?
At the moment, the DFE who manage that are doing testing of the site and the groundworks, and are planning to have a scheme ready to bring for a planning application later in the summer, I believe. So things should be firming up there.
Thank you. And I think we've got one further question from Councillor Sweeting, I think.
Right, thank you, Chair. There are 3 pages I'd like to bring to your attention. One is page 61, which gives the pupil cohorts, starting with Year 6 and going right the way down to reception. Then we have the page 74, which gives the list of secondary schools. Those in particular I'd like to sort of highlight, because what I think we have are these huge numbers going through, remembering what Dan Kennedy said about the cohort survival rates between 97 and 98%. So I believe that the number of Year 7 places as of the last admissions year was 3,787. This meant the 4 bulge classes at Dowey, Guru, Rosedale and Uxbridge High. Now, if we look at the Year 6 numbers of 3924 and we take what we think is the cohort survival, that brings it to 308, 3806 or 3767. But we are now saying that now it needs to be 6% wriggle room, not 5%, but 6%. So that would mean an additional 228 to 226 places. Now, unless you've got a magic wand and there's more bulge classes going into many of those schools that we don't know about, we seem to have a mismatch of about 200 places, because the need will be between 4,034 and 3,993. But your report says that we basically we're not planning for any more secondary places. So I'm not quite certain where we are with this. Have I got my figures wrong?
I think, if I may, before Sarah answers, I think we're saying no secondary expansion beyond that already planned. But Sarah, you can no doubt give a fuller answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, we've got the expansion of 1.5 FE at Hillingdon planned and hopefully being built and spades in the ground and everything at the moment. And then the progression to the movement on the free school in West Ruislip. And yes, there will be some bulge classes in other schools as well. I'm not quite sure of those figures, as you said. One of the things that we are looking at as well is obviously this issue that has been raised before about how many people from Hillingdon, apart from Harefield, go to Harefield Academy, and how and that the capacity there. But we believe that we've got some bulge classes for 22 and we can get through on this, but I can bring that back to the next committee in more detail.
Yes, because
Thank you for that.
I'm sorry to
So
interrupt, can I just say that...
Could you please speak to the Chair, Councillor Sweeting? Go ahead, thank you.
Because what we've got are not just the Year 6 numbers, but if you look, I mean, it's 3926, 3778, 3851. I mean, they're all really high, and it starts with September intake, and so the bulge classes will need to be continued until a new school is there ready for us, and a new Harlington is up and running as well. So, you know, I would be very grateful for an update on all of this, and I'm very happy to share with you my figures and to be proved wrong.
Well, if there's information that the rest of us aren't privy to, it would be good for us all to see that information, if that's okay, Councillor Sweeting. And do you have an initial comment to make on that? Because that's clearly something we'll need to look at offline, I think.
The definite date we've got, obviously, is for Harlington to have its bigger intake in September 2023. And we've got some other schools which have still got some space in their upper year groups, so they can take bulge classes for the next few years. But we will give you a fuller update on all of the secondary issues later on.
Thank you for your question. The good thing about speaking last is most of my questions have been picked up already. But I do have one around the number of parents that are making a first choice outside the borough, over 25% according to the report. That's quite a significant figure, I would have thought. I suppose my question is it out of kilter significantly with other years? And based on our experience, what is the likely prospect of success, of what proportion of those? Because clearly that will have a bearing on our future thinking, won't it, in respect of this coming year and beyond. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that, please, Sarah.
It does appear that it's around that number apply each year, and not all of those get their first and second preference out of the borough. So a lot of our schools are filling up with third and fourth preferences, which makes the whole prediction that much more difficult, because you can't quite tell where it's all going to land. But we still think, I mean, we're going to monitor all of this very carefully this year, because we're aware that out of London, Slough, which is where the majority of those wanting to go out of the borough are applying for schools in Slough, has its bulge coming up behind us. So they've now got more of their own pupils. But of course some of their schools are selective, so it's not just about distance, it's about the grade in the exam. So it's very, very difficult to call, but we think we've got it, that it'll match up.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we've had a reasonable level of debate, I think, which is good, because that's what we're here to do. Obviously, we're dealing with both reports, Report 6 and 7 now. Report 6 on the PANS and the admissions are asking for us to make some comments to Cabinet. Now, there's more than one way to skin a cat. This is something that the committee could delegate to myself and Councillor Prince to take offline. However, what I've done for this particular item is I've actually drafted a few lines that I hope reflect reasonably well what's been said and the views of the committee. I'll be interested on Councillor Prince's view on that. For the benefit of the watching public, however, I will read what those few words are, if that's okay. So essentially it's this: the committee recognises the challenges associated with school-placed planning and the necessity for periodic reviews for admissions criteria and PAN numbers to keep schools viable and on a sustainable financial footing. It therefore endorses the recommendations coming before Cabinet. The committee believes it's important to take every opportunity to build flexibility into school estates to help cater for the fluctuating cyclical demand, and endorses officers' reports. I beg your pardon, let me start that again. And endorses officers' approach to this, as well as the collaborative work undertaken with schools throughout this process on an ongoing basis. Now, I'm going to give that an airing. I've discussed it with my colleagues. Councillor Prince, you and I haven't discussed it. What's your response to that?
Yes, I haven't.
Okay, well that was straightforward then, wasn't it? Okay, super. Okay, well if there's no more comments or questions on these two items, let's take the recommendations for item 6 first, and then if we can agree that those comments then constitute the Select Committee's comments to Cabinet on the admission numbers, if that's agreed. item 6, and then agenda item 7. Can we agree the recommendations there, please? Are they agreed? Thank you very much indeed. Super. Thank you. Right. Thank you very much, Sarah, for your efforts as always. And Dan, I think Daniel might be staying for the budget item, mightn't you? Okay, lovely. And while we've been talking, I think Sarah's, not Sarah, I beg your pardon, what's the matter with you? Debbie has walked into the room. It's great to see you. Glad you made it. Right on cue, because we've just finished the previous item. Would you like to, let's find the right page, would you like to introduce the report? Or do you want a bit of time? Are you okay?
No, I'm fine.
Super.
Thank you.
It's great to see you. I haven't seen you for a while since I visited the centre a few years ago now.
That's
right. But pleased to see the report and look forward to hearing from you. So please.
Thank you. So I'll just briefly explain what the report is. The self-assessment report, or the SAR, is something that we are charged with writing every year. It's an evaluative report, but it's based on the Ofsted Education Inspection Framework, and it outlines the strengths, the areas for improvement of the service, and any sort of in-year key improvements, and just the main points really to summarise the service and the impact of what we do and where that money goes. Once it's approved, the annual report is sent to Ofsted and the Department for Education and the GLA, and of course it needs to be approved by the council first. In doing that, because time was a bit tight this year, Councillor O'Brien has already signed it off, which is how it's already gone up to Ofsted. One of the things it highlights is sort of who our learners are and what we're trying to achieve. So we work with adults over the age of 19. We're funded externally in the same way that Uxbridge College is funded, with an amount of funding also that we get from the council in order to help us keep fees low for residents. We have 85% of our learners are women, 58% come from the south of the borough. We target Hillingdon residents primarily, although because our funding comes through the GLA, that has to be open to other people in London. So there's only about 2% of our learners that come through, that are grant funded, that come from outside of London. And we target those people that are the most disadvantaged, coming from most deprived areas, and with the lowest skills and the lowest potential for salary, pay, economic achievement. One of the things that comes through in the report, I'm sure you'll have spotted, is the impact of COVID, which I'm sure you're sick to death of hearing about, but obviously I must mention it. We've seen that really affect particular groups, older people in particular, many of whom came to the personal development courses that you would naturally associate with adult learning, such as, your art courses, your Spanish, French courses, those sort of leisure courses that people automatically link with us. Many of them did that because it kept their minds active, and it also sort of provides a social life and to people to meet outside and keeps you thinking. But they were definitely a group that we have seen a drop in enrolments from. Also, people with learning difficulties and disabilities struggled through COVID and couldn't easily adapt to online learning, as the older people struggled with as well in many cases. We had some issues around vocational because certain employers weren't able to take on more employees and so on because of the lockdowns and everything. And of course, the lowest skilled were the most disadvantaged because you could only really embrace online learning, and we transferred a lot of things to online through the lockdowns, if you've already got some digital skills, and it's the lowest skilled that don't have those. So it did definitely disadvantage more people. But on the other hand, we had new ideas, new approaches. We really did a lot to develop our volunteers. We came up with online briefing sessions. We adapted enrolment so that if people wanted to apply to do a course that doesn't have a qualification attached, they could just enrol online without having to come to centres and so on. So we changed a lot of things. Our initial assessments changed. And so that sort of sums up the purpose of the SAR and what we tried to explain in it. And hopefully that's given you a bit of an introduction to get you going.
Thank you. It has indeed. Thank you very much for that, Debbie. Okay, what questions? I've got a question for Councillor McQuarrie and Councillor Speaking. Okay, Councillor McQuarrie.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the report. I think that there are many strengths of the service, and you can see that really in the learner feedback. So well done for that. My question is around. I know you've provided a bit of breakdown in terms of the actual students. Is it possible to get a breakdown according to their age groups? Obviously, you've said they're 19 plus, but do you have that kind of data? I'd just be interested to know, like, which age groups are actually kind of enrolling and on what kind of courses.
Yeah, it's more difficult now because of GDPR. We're not actually allowed to ask people's ages. So I can give you a rough breakdown, but if I can send that through to you, that would be great. But what we have seen is we know that we sort of know where those older learners were going. And I mean, our oldest learner, just before COVID actually, was 100. So sort of it goes up and up and up. And so we know, because we see them in the centres, that mostly they were doing those non-accredited courses. But also, there's another group that are older learners and are in that disadvantaged group. You know, with all due respect, you have to have some disposable income if you're not working to be able to pay for a Spanish course or whatever. So that other group we're still targeting. We still work with older people. If they come into that disadvantage, well, we'll go out and try to find them. But no, mostly when we were able to collect that data, most of our residents were about 30, 28, 30, up to about 60. That was the bulk. They were the bulk of our learners, and I'd say that's still true now.
Oh, quick follow-up.
Yeah, thank you. Another question that I had was, obviously you talked about the pandemic, but the pandemic aside, do you know any of the other reasons why students may then kind of come off their courses or decide to discontinue?
Well, really, I mean, sometimes they're just things in their lives change. Sometimes it's just adult life that gets in the way. Sometimes it's that they've gone off and they've got work, so they've come to the end of the courses. But because we don't target the sort of the quick wins, if you like. We don't get people that are ready to just do another one or two things and then move on. We target people that have got very low basic skills, that really don't have many digital skills, that are really kind of at the bottom of the pile, if you like. And we work with them, and so they can be with us for 5 years, 6 years sometimes. So generally speaking, pre-pandemic, I would have said about half of our learners come back and back and back and back and back, and the other half rotate round. So sometimes it was just that life changed for them. Sometimes circumstances changed for them, and they might not have the same sort of money. And sometimes they'd done it, really, and it was time to move on. But mostly it was life things. It was just something would change in their lives. They might become a grandparent and suddenly be taking care of the children, or there'd be something else that happened and they'd move on.
Thank you. Councillor Sweeting has a question.
Well, thank you. And I say that once again, a confirmation that your service is a good one and that you've risen to the challenge of COVID.
Thank you.
Well done
Thank
to your team. Has the major review, because I was part of the other lot that was looking at your service as a major review, has that major review helped in any way, and if so, how?
I'm sorry, has it helped?
Has the major review, us putting you through the microscope, has this helped your service, and if so, how has it helped?
I think it has helped. I think it's helped in all sorts of ways, actually. From an internal point of view, it's helped in terms of there was one particular session that I brought a couple of staff members into and a learner, and it was really interesting seeing the repercussions of that on the staff members and hearing conversations about almost like, Debbie knows her stuff, doesn't she? There was a bit of that and a bit of, oh, is that the kind of scrutiny we have? Because they wouldn't be anywhere near that kind of thing usually. So, you know, joking aside, it was good to have members of the team that wouldn't normally be exposed to any kind of scrutiny like that, except when Ofsted come in possibly, recognise that actually, you know, we are accountable. This is public funding, and there are lots of things that I do that show that we're accountable. So from an internal perspective, that was quite useful because it just broadened that idea. I think it's great that the recommendations that have been passed, I mean, for instance, changing the name to Hillingdon ACE, which I know is a little bit twee, but we're known as adult learning, adult education, adult community learning, and to try to get some branding moving forward, particularly as we move more online, you know, and learn times of sustainability and so on, where we won't have the brochure published next year, it'll be online. Changing that branding and having a bit of a social media push and so on is really going to help in terms of getting that message out to residents. So that wouldn't have happened. And from the perspective of getting, it enabled me to talk to members as I'm doing now, which I would never normally be able to do. So it helped. I know that you, for instance, are aware of the service, and the other members of the committee are aware of the service, which is really good because it's hard sometimes to describe what you do. I think there's such a historic impression of adult education about those leisure courses, which now make up that much of what we do. And all the other stuff, the mental health stuff, everything else that we do, it's hard to get people to understand that. So it was really useful from that point of view, just to get the word out about the service that is part of the council that I think is a good advertisement for the council and what we try to do for residents.
Good to have that affirmation of the process, isn't it? Great, thank you. Go ahead.
The major review recommended a robust bid to the GLA for additional funding. Has that got anywhere?
We're working on it. Councillor O'Brien has been really supportive, and she's asked us to put together some data around the income, the equivalent income and use of that income across West London. Trying to get hold of that data, particularly leading up to Christmas, was quite tricky, so we're still working on it. But the idea of that is that she's been speaking to, I want to say Councillor Simmons, and that's wrong, isn't it? David Simmons MP. I beg your pardon. It was tripping off my tongue then. So that he can hopefully do something from that angle. She's trying. So it's going to be a long road. You know, there's no money around anywhere, is there? And people aren't going to be looking to increasing anybody's funding. So, but we're also looking into other avenues. So we're toying with trying to get some apprenticeships going, which would be another funding stream which could help us. But we're just at the beginning parts of that. So we'll find something. Yeah. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you. Okay, so next I've got Councillor Tutwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you again, Debbie. Been a while. My question, I think you touched on it a second or two ago, but it's really good in the report to see how professional development for staff is a key focus. But what I'm interested in is, in order to take that and further and further support the learners, have we encouraged your staff and volunteers to attend mental health first aid courses? And if so, how has that helped in terms of supporting the learners?
Well, we were lucky. A few years ago, we had, 2 years ago actually, we had a large additional funding of £470,000 for a project that we abbreviated to SIP, which enabled us to pay staff for training, which was really great because usually we're not in a position to do that. So generally, we will pay for the training and they will pay for their time. We don't actually, but that meant we could get lots of people in. So we got, we ran two, I think, mental health first aid training courses, which we targeted initially at everybody delivering the mental health training, and then with the second course we targeted it wider. So we got I went and did it. Lots of people went and did it. So that was really useful. We tend to run, what we do is we have conferences twice a year where we bring staff in. We do pay them for those. And at that point, we do whatever training we need to do. So the last one was all about domestic abuse. And we ran a lot of the modules of the workplace safe space thing. So we try to do it like that. So we've got mental health first aid out there, but it's more than that. When I did the course, it was really interesting, but actually what it didn't do, because it couldn't, was teach tutors how to teach people with mental health issues. So we tend to do CPD and make it more internal, and we do a lot of mentoring and things like that. So it tends to be more one-to-one with that to make it very, very operational and practical.
No, thank you.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Hale next, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, we wanted not to repeat everyone, but it is a very good report. And what I really actually enjoyed was you've got it's really easy to read, but also you've got your service strength and your areas for development. That for me was a major hit, because I think it's really important that we're always focusing on the future and what we can do. And I love the booklets and everything that go out. I share them out. I think they're brilliant. They're really easy.
Thank you.
One of the questions I had was about digital exclusion, because obviously that's a really big thing. It's come massively in the pandemic. I'm sure we're going to see it advance later on. I know we have it in here because we've got English, Maths, ESOL and digital skills qualification. But is that something we might bring forward for the future to push a bit more into, those that can't actually access email, WhatsApp, even the simple things, isn't it? I think we've seen that more. So I just wanted to know what your views were on that and how we're going to include that.
I completely agree with you. It's something that's really high on our list of priorities because it underpins so much now. It's so essential. Something I'm quite proud of is that the government paid for new essential digital skills qualifications to be developed, and they came out and were published last year. They were supposed to be ready prior to September. It actually took till halfway through the year. But they were based on standards that were written about 18 months before. So we knew there was a problem. We took the standards and we started to develop courses, and we had a year before those courses came out that we started to develop and deliver. We offered them free, and it meant that not only were we able to offer some non-accredited courses to residents, we could learn about the kinds of problems with space. We could see what equipment we needed. We could teach our staff how to deliver those. And that actually really stood us in good stead, because the qualifications were so delayed that we would have had no provision had we waited for them. So I'm really proud of that, because everybody worked so hard to do it. And certainly, the digital skills quals are free. They're fully funded. They draw down not very much funding, but they're fully funded for residents, so they don't have to pay for them. And it's just a question of getting as many people through as we can. And it's one of the things that's worrying us about the current situation, because as soon as you've got those essential digital skills, you can start to get online. The higher level courses are more, can lend themselves more to online delivery, but the lower level, and most of what we do is the lower level, they can't get on. It's really difficult. So yeah, it's a constant problem, and we're working on it.
Thank you. Okay, question from me now. We've spoken on 2 or 3 occasions in the fairly recent past around people with LD in different reports. We've spoken about the health checks, and I can see in the report that that you're supporting that and helping to encourage those people to take those up, which is great. We've also spoken about the employment of people with LD, and I know that there are the employability-related training interventions here, which is good. And then we asked ourselves the question, well, of those people with LD, and this goes back to when we changed eligibility criteria all those years ago, how many of them are actually actively seeking employment, and I suppose how many are actually content to complete different courses when they come along. So I suppose that's my first question, perhaps, of the LD cohort. And you also talk about, as a development area, developing the relationship with employers. And I wonder how much of an opportunity you see that as, given local skills shortages, and how you see that moving forward. So 2 questions in one, if that's all right.
Yes, and I'm going to cry my way through both of them, I think. They are really tough, those two. If you just take employment for people that have no learning difficulties, it's not an encouraging situation currently, is it? It's very difficult. We do whatever we can to encourage it. So we've got a job club, a jobs board rather, which we use. We work with the chap that works here whose name escapes me now, from the JCP, who's based in the Civic, and we get updates from the JCP through him, which we advertise to our learners. We run a careers fair every year. We tried to do it twice a year, but it didn't work. But a careers fair works well annually. And last year we did it online for the first time, which worked surprisingly well, actually. We have strong links with the National Career Service, and we sort out workshops as well as one-to-one appointments for people to try to help them get on the ladder. We've got employability embedded in so many of our courses, most of our vocational courses, if not all of them, and we're trying to build it into English, maths, ESOL, digital skills. That's one of our next things we're going to start working on. We work with various employers in various sectors, for instance, floristry, many of whom we have trained. The problem is florists are hanging on by their fingernails. Most of the businesses we work with are micro businesses or schools. Schools, we had a whole load of people going through training to teach them how to be teaching assistants, but in order to complete the qualification and move on to the next level, they have to do a work placement in a school. The schools, understandably, when they were open, were not taking volunteers in, so we had a whole cohort of people stuck because they couldn't move forward, and we're trying to get that backed up. So in terms of employability within education, we've got it quite well covered. There's always more you can do, but we've got that. Trying to get people into employment is a whole other ballgame. And so one of the things we're doing that we want to work on currently that can help us know how successful we're being is that the data system we've got is actually just going through the process of the contract being renewed. But as soon as we get that renewed, we want to get some data pulled out of our system because it's sitting in there, but we can't access it, so that we can see what the progression is into work. We should be able to get some sort of solid data then. We run destination surveys, which means that we start off online and then we start ringing people to say, it's 6 months since you left us with your last course, have you got any employment? And so that data's starting to come through. But it is really difficult, and one of the things that I think is going to really help us move the service forward is to strengthen those links, to help people actually go. We can do the underpinning stuff, we can help people with CVs and interview skills, and we've got volunteers that have worked in HR who run mock interviews for people and feedback, and we've got all of that's there, but the actual trying to get them into work is tricky. If you then magnify that because you've got somebody with a learning difficulty or a disability, it's even harder. We have got some sort of, interestingly, obviously we have a core group of staff who are employed and have got full contracts, but we've also got people that are doing sessional work, either as a teacher or as a learning support assistant or a teaching assistant. And many of our volunteers who start off as learners, having had the training and we put them through a DBS and so on, they then go off and we've got quite a high proportion of those that go into work in schools, and in fact we had somebody that we interviewed from that group recently, and she'd got a full-time job in a school by the time we went back to her and said, yes, we want you, which was only 2 days. And we've now got 14 of those volunteers employed as on sessional contracts with us, either as teaching assistants or volunteers or tutors. So, we are making small inroads into it, but microscopic, really. It's not for those people's lives, but it is in terms of the population. And it's very, very difficult with adults with learning difficulties. I think there's something about the age and capturing them at the right age. So we've got three actually in particular, who are youngsters. They're early 30s. They've got an aptitude for digital skills, so we've brought them on as volunteers. They are now trained as digital champions, and what we want to do is keep building that up a bit so that they can help their peers get on, and potentially they could come and be sessional teaching assistants for us. So we're trying to do it in a very small way, but it's so difficult trying to persuade employers that these guys have got a lot to offer.
Indeed, and I'm not surprised really by much of that, and I thank you for your sterling efforts in that regard. I know they say people with autism have certain skill sets that could be quite valuable to employers, and often employers are frightened by people with autism, frankly, and these are the sort of things we need to overcome, so thanks for your efforts in relation to that and many other things.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm looking around the room. Don't seem to have any. Councillor Prince, are you indicating?
I wasn't, but I will. I just wanted to say what a great, fantastic, wonderful report this is, and commend you on your energy as well. It's obviously, it's inspired me sitting here just listening. Just one little thing. I think I've noticed a few acronyms being used, and not knowing what they are, and I want to call you out, Chair, because you said LDs instead of people with learning disabilities, and people watching might not know what that meant. So just future, because I'd like to hope that these reports are hopefully being read by people who aren't officers or councillors, and can help them understand better. Thanks.
Yep, you're absolutely right. I'll do my best. I try so hard not to do it, but it's, you know what it's like. But yeah, I've shared this with all the staff, and we're planning to put it up on the website after this, as long as you guys are okay with it. So I will go through and check.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the feedback, Councillor Prince, as well. Okay, so really just to wind up this discussion, no one else is indicating. Debbie, thank you very much for joining us to present this. It's great to see you again. This is an area of service that I think has really, not only have you faced into COVID, you've actually made opportunities out of it, and we've really grown the offer, if you like, in terms of what's there. So that's really good to hear. Good to get some positive affirmation around the major review, albeit not one that I was involved in, but it's good to see that it's working more generally, so that's great. And clearly you're doing a great deal to support people, many of our vulnerable residents who need support, and the sort of intervention to add great value to their lives. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Please take our thanks back to your colleagues and obviously to yourself. And we look forward to future reports now you sit with the Select Committee in terms of reporting.
That would be fantastic. If you can cope with more of me, then I would absolutely welcome that.
I'm sure we can handle it. Thank you very much.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are the recommendations agreed? They're agreed. Thank you. Thank you, David. Feel free to stay for the budget bit, but don't forget.
Okay, I'll go. Thank you. I'm so sorry about the mix-up earlier.
Okay, so moving on then to the budget item. Just get papers out for a moment. Okay, right. So we've got with us this evening Gemma. Thank you very much, Gemma McMarmara, to present, and I think Dan's going to support on the education side of the budget, if that's okay. So this is our opportunity again to comment and to be briefed on this major policy report. And over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. And apologies this evening, my colleague Graham Young was going to be attending with me, and he specialises on the DSG and education and skills side. So Dan has kindly agreed to stay along just in case you have any questions, but I have a feeling they might have been answered already in the item earlier from Sarah. So the paper that you have in front of you is the second budget report that is presented to Select Committee as part of the consultation process for the 22-23 budget. The comments from this meeting will then obviously form part of the budget proposals that are considered by Cabinet in February before being presented for consideration to Council. This report presents a balanced budget for 22-23 with a residual gap of 4.7 million over the remaining term of the MTFF. This includes a council tax increase of 1.8% and an increase to the social care precept of 1%. As I'm sure it won't come as a surprise, the ongoing and significant impact of COVID has been taken into account and is shown in the demand and growth inflation figures within this report. This particularly affects this committee because obviously the bulk of that impact is within social care, so there are some rather large figures which I'll come on to. Over the term of the MTFF, the residual and ongoing pressure from COVID that we'd expect to see is around about 7 million. The current year position shows a forecast underspend of 419,000, with general balances remaining firmly within the required range at 26.5 million, a level which is projected to be maintained over the life of the MTFF, as we're not budgeting to draw down from balances over the course of this time. In addition, it's projected that by the end of this financial year, the 31st of March 2020, earmarked reserves will total 30 million, with 11 million of that set aside to fund COVID-related pressures. Within the report, capital expenditure is projected at 383 million over the term of the MTFF to invest in local infrastructure, a new leisure centre and the delivery of additional SEND capacity within the borough schools, which we've already mentioned tonight. Table 2 within the report, which I believe is on page 87, shows the creation of the 22-23 budget within the remit of this committee from the 21-22 position, adjusted for inflation, demand-led growth and then savings. As I mentioned before, these figures do show the significant impact on services, particularly within health and social care from the COVID pandemic, with inflation at 4.5 million, demand-led growth at 10.5 million. These pressures have then been reduced by mitigating actions of 3.5 million. So just to review each of these items in turn, the 4.5 million of inflation relates to uplifts in workforce budgets relating to pay awards, increases in the cost of care placements, contracted expenditure and energy costs, which have increased significantly. With regard to the demand-led growth, social care not unexpectedly has seen these significant increases in demand over the past 2 years. The figure of 10.5 million reflects the position should no mitigating actions be put in place. So based on a steady state from now, that would lead to a £10.5 million increase in growth over this period. The 3 million that are shown in the savings column are then actually mitigating actions, so things that we can do to then try and scale back that, rather than them being savings in the strictly understood sense of the word. So those are more on the mitigating action side. Just to run through a couple of the key examples which are within social care in particular, we've seen a marked increase in the numbers of looked after children. In 2021 we saw an increase of 13% compared to the 3 or 4% increases that we're used to seeing in recent years, which has added 2.8 million to the service expenditure there. This is then partly offset by effective procurement. For example, moving to more block contracts for placements of semi-independent living, rather than relying on the more expensive spot placements as part of the mitigating action that will help to bring that cost down, and also the longer term impact of the Stronger Families model. In addition, as a result of the increasing numbers of children supported by education, health and care plans, the demand for SEN transport has increased, accordingly with the further 1.3 million anticipated to be required to cover this. This is largely as a result of that requirement for the out-of-borough placements, which come at a higher transport cost. As we heard earlier, however, the SEN provision expansion that's included in the capital programme will create that additional in-borough placements to be able to reduce these costs over the longer term period. Within adults, demand for care services is projected to grow over the MTFF period, which will necessitate an additional 5.7 million. There has been an increase in the demand for home care over the COVID period, while other services such as day centres were not available, which has led to a pressure in this area. However, with those outreach and day centres operating again, that behaviour we would hope to be changing to move back to how it was working previously. In addition, a very strong approach to reablement services through our contracted provider is anticipated to stem the demand for home care and enable residents not to require those ongoing social care needs wherever possible. In addition, a pre-pandemic increase in the demand for mental health has only been exacerbated during the pandemic, and that has led to a significant increase in the volume and the complexity of needs in this area. The inclusion of mental health within reablement and crisis step-down provision are hoped to start assisting with that de-escalation of need, which should then in turn help to reduce those costs. The final area of demand-led growth is that while the direct costs of supporting unaccompanied asylum-seeking children are met through government grants, an increase in the number of age-disputed assessments and the National Transfer Scheme has led to additional resource requirements within children's services in order to support those children and to undertake those age assessments. In the absence of further funding, these will currently require an uplift of 625k in 22-23, with further slight increases in subsequent years. Within the capital programme of the 383 million, 83 million relates to projects within the remit of this committee and are detailed in the appendices at the end of the report. The largest item within these proposals is the 53.7 million that's set aside for increasing the number of school places available for those children with special educational needs, with further amounts set aside to fund secondary school expansion and the creation of additional temporary classrooms. Finally, the schools budget is reporting an in-year deficit of 12.6 million and a cumulative deficit of 38 million by the end of March 22. As mentioned in the schools item earlier this evening, significant work has been undertaken on the DSG recovery plan as part of discussions with the DFE and Schools Forum. These initial plans have been submitted, to which revisions can be made through January as part of the ongoing discussions, prior to formal feedback from the DFE, which is hoped to come through in February. That was all I was going to say on the report. If anyone has any questions, I'd be more than happy to take them. Thank you.
We'll do that. Yeah, is there anything to add, Dan, on that for now or not?
Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. I should donate to the Mayor's charity each time I do that. That would teach me, wouldn't it? In fact, I will. A couple of questions about the way we actually road test this for robustness. Now, certainly, there are a number of things within the budget. I mean, where we're looking for savings, and we've identified savings, and one of them is around home care, and sort of going back to a pre-pandemic model of home care to deliver some savings. Railroad's hugely powerful in achieving that, but of course COVID stood in the way of it. Given the volatile situation with COVID still, I would hope that we're being prudent in our assumptions about how soon that will happen, how soon that will be feasible. I suppose that's one observation perhaps for you to comment on. Just another around the budget as a whole, I suppose, just on the special needs side and the provision of the additional free school spaces, which we've heard about in earlier reports this evening, and you've touched on here. What's clear is that there are some delays with some of these sites, and I'm just wondering again the extent to which we've been prudent in making assumptions about savings in travel costs, given that sort of issue. So I suppose that, and one final thing, just briefly, and that is the national insurance rise, which was touted very much as something that which would help to fund social care. I trust we're making no assumptions at all about getting anything out of that, because those of us who've been around a while learn that very much goes into the health service rather than social services. If I see any of it go in that direction one day, I'll be very happy, but I have my doubts. So 3 questions into one, if that's okay, please, Gemma.
Absolutely. So I think you're absolutely right, and this has been a challenging budget to set. Potentially not quite as challenging as last year when we were still very much deep in the middle of the pandemic, but we still are in that position where there are certain areas, for example, mental health. We don't know for sure how that pattern, or how that, if we look at the need and how that's going to start kind of coming back down over the length of the MTFF or longer. We don't know how sharply that will happen, or whether it will take or whether it will be quite gradual. I think the key thing with the volatility, I would say that actually in terms of this budget, I would say it is one of the most robust that I remember working on, and I have been here for a very long time, because we have a very strong understanding of the figures, particularly on the social care side. A lot of these areas we've gone back to client level detail and then built it back up again from scratch, so we can be as confident as we can be in the figures that we have. What we have to be able to balance out that volatility, as you quite rightly suggest, we've got 11 million set aside in COVID reserves for next year, and what we've done with the assumptions for COVID is that it will start to decrease over a period of time. So I think next year the COVID pressure is expected to be around about 9.7 million, with it falling to about 7 million by the time we get to the end of the MTFF. So that's the sort of margin that we're working with, and that's what we're expecting it to look like. So for both the wider point that you made on the volatility for COVID recovery, and then with the SEND provision as well. Within SEN transport, there have been a number of pressures this year that have been covered through COVID monies, particularly things like as schools have been operating, rather than having a route that's got a vehicle with 3 children who are attending the same route. They've been spaced out into different vehicles, which has led to an increase in the costs. We'd still expect to not be straight back to a normal kind of state of affairs by the time we hit September, and that's what that 11 million is set aside to be able to help us smooth that recovery over the next 2 years. And the final point that you made on the national insurance increase, we have factored that in terms of the costs that we'll see on our side, but we've not factored anything in to do with income.
Afraid that's the right way around, but
okay.
No, thank you for that.
Thank
right,
you.
I've got indications from Councillor Sweeting, Mr Little and Kerry Finn. So Councillor Sweeting first, please.
Thank you for the report. I'm looking at page 87, paragraph 11, and we are having a borrowing requirement of 273 million. Now, how do we stand in Hillingdon with that sort of borrowing compared to other London boroughs and our statistical neighbours? And can I also look at Appendix A81111, when it says secondary school expansions, it's got money set aside for, this current financial year, but it seems to have 0, 0, 0, 0 for the following. Has it come off the cliff, or is there something I've missed, or is there figures that are not included? Because it appears on that one that we've got no money for secondary school expansion.
Mr Chairman, before you answer that, Councillor Sweeting, you're referring to the Cabinet report that was... Which report are you talking about? Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of where we stand of the borrowing requirement, I don't believe that we're out of kilter, but I'd like to actually go and have a look at that and come back to you after the meeting, if I may, to give you an indication of where we stand compared to our neighbours. With regard to the secondary school expansion, I believe the figure that's been included at the moment are for the 1.5 FE expansion of Harlington School, and then the remainder for the final account payments and retentions on Ruislip High School and Viners, where there's those extensions there. As for the ongoing programme after that, I don't have any information on that. I think what's been included, it's not uncommon that we would include it on a year-on-year basis based on what the needs are that are coming through, and then everything else currently is obviously tied up with a lot of the DFE recovery work. So once we've got that back, we'll then be able to have an updated version. I don't know if you want to add anything.
I have a further question, Chair.
Go ahead. I'm indulgent to you.
Being polite. The appendix also sets aside monies for youth provision. What does this actually comprise? Is it for uniformed organisations, or is it for our own youth centres?
I believe that is earmarked for the construction of the Scouts and Guides huts, so the new uniformed groups.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Little. Councillor, Mr Little.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions, if I may. The first one, they're all relating to the education budget. The first one is that there is a decrease of 20% in the funding for central schools services. What will be the impact of that?
Shall I jump in on that one? I mean, this is part of the DSG deficit recovery plan and proposals, and some of the details are obviously needing to be worked through, but there are costs in there which are related to overhead costs, for example, which we will be looking to make efficiencies on without any impact on directly on services provided to schools.
Right.
Do you want to carry on with the other two?
Yep, if I may. They actually both relate to the deficit relating to high needs. The first one is the shorter term one about proposals to mitigate the growing pressure by using funds from the schools transferred across to that budget. What was the response of Schools Forum to this?
That they supported the proposal.
And the third one is the longer term one in relation to the recovery plan. Obviously you haven't agreed the details of it yet with the DFE, so you can't give us the details, so I'm not asking for that. But what I am asking for is a general flavour of what it will look like. Is it going to be substantially new money from DFE? Is it going to be substantially money transferred from the schools? Or is there a third solution that I haven't thought of?
I mean, you're quite right. The details are obviously subject to further conversation, discussion with the DFE, so not finalised yet. But in broad terms, a significant part of that, of which was set out in the earlier paper that Sarah presented, is about increasing the provision of places in Borough, which avoids the need for placements in higher cost independent settings outside the Borough or inside the Borough. And therefore, what that also then reduces is transport costs and so on. So it's a collective or cumulative position, and also just looking really for ways to repurpose existing school buildings, which are may become available through and in discussion with those schools and trusts about how those buildings can be repurposed and reused. Again, providing local places, increasing the provision of local places for local children.
Thank you.
If I may, just as a follow-up, will there be money from the DFE as a part of that?
Well, the funding, the capital funding available for extra places is through a separate sort of process. There's a grant funding available for that. And then, but it will be, any agreement that's reached with the DFE will be subject to obviously delivery of their plan. So in terms of any sort of the payment for contribution towards the deficit will be subject to the delivery of, I guess, key milestones. But all of that is up for discussion with the Department for Education.
Thank you. I have quite a few questions. I hope you'll indulge me like you've indulged Councillor Philip.
Try and roll them into one if you can.
I'll try.
As best you can.
As best I can. Okay, the first one, which I'm going to hopefully take first. Gemma, could you please repeat what you were saying about, in terms of savings and semi-independent accommodation? Is it that the council are choosing to put, I assume, over 16s in semi-independent accommodation instead of, say, with foster carers? Is that the approach? I'm just trying to understand what it was that you meant.
So with the provision of the semi-independent living placements, or shared accommodation in particular, once a child has turned 18, they move into shared accommodation. A lot to do with if we were to purchase that on a spot contract, it would be anywhere between £400 and £600 a week. We currently have some block accommodation that is chargeable at the universal credit rate or very, very near that. So that can lead to significant savings within children. So rather than continue to purchase on a spot placement, and that's kind of consistent across the rest of social care as well, we'll try and get those economies of scale wherever possible.
Thank you. Okay, I'll try and merge the other one. The safety valve issue, I mean, that is one of the biggest challenges facing the council, and if the department doesn't agree, this is what Section 114 notice, they'll be saying council's bankrupt. I think this potentially isn't being talked about enough, and as seriously as this is, we talk a lot about if the proposals are agreed, and not much focus at all on what if they're not. We won't be the only local authority applying for this, and we certainly aren't the first if you have had them in recent years. So I note that expected a decision will be reached by February, which puts us in the difficult position of
giving comments to cabinet on something that we don't know, and I feel that we just simply don't have enough information at this point on what is a major issue to give the green light to it. That's not really a question, I appreciate, but I've said it anyway. The send transport stuff, and I'm not sure if I've just misread, but I think Councillor Sweeting agreed with me privately. On section 15, it has demand for send transport is expected to grow by 1,276,000, and then on 18 II, it talks about savings on send transport spend. Is it going up or going down? And it also, the last question on paragraph 17, talk about the National Transfer Scheme and the has increased costs. Wouldn't the National Transfer Scheme take children out of the borough rather than bring them in, seeing as we have a high amount, therefore the National Transfer Scheme, which has just been made mandatory, I believe, would remove them from the borough, thus lowering our financial obligation on that. Just trying to understand really how the National Transfer Scheme adds to our expenditure. I think that's it. Thanks.
All those, Gemma?
I think so.
Okay.
Let me take a swing through it. If I've missed any, then please let me know. Obviously, your concerns regarding the safety valve are very valid, and you quite rightly state that this is a massive issue that's affecting the council. We can't comment on it particularly until we've had that review back or that feedback back from the DFE, but our reserves, although we're in a good financial position, would not be sufficient to be able to cover off that full deficit. So we'll have to wait and hear back from the feedback from the DFE, which I don't know if I can say it sounds positive that we'll get something so far or not, but we'll be able to give a position in February, so unfortunately can't give you any more information on that one. With regard to send transport, I appreciate that the way that we've shown all of the growth and the pressures and the savings, which is why I was trying to go through each one in detail, because it is a bit confusing to we're showing the growth as if we do nothing, that 1.276 million. If we do nothing, then that's the additional cost that we'll have in send transport, and that's if we assume that the EHCPs continues to go up. The send transport conversion rate for those is about 30%. So if we start to see really significant increases in the number of children with EHCPs, that has just this knock-on effect. Although that is an issue in its own right, the bigger issue that we have is with the lack of sufficiency of placements in the borough. The bulk of what we've included for next year is for out-of-borough placements. And as a general rule of thumb, the transport costs for an in-borough placement for send transport would be about 4k compared to 15k out of borough. So as we start to increase the number of places we have available, with each one of those we start to reduce that and scale it back. So the numbers are going up, but with the new provision, we'll hope that we'll bring them back into the borough, which means the cost will go down. So you're right on both of those. It's kind of up and down on two different points of it. With the National Transfer Scheme, it's specifically relating, and again, you're right with the scheme has been made mandatory. We're not impacted in terms of being a recipient of any children's part of that because we already have high levels of UASC. What we're referring to is that over the course of the pandemic, I suppose, but particularly in the past, say, year, with the dispersal scheme from Kent, and I think we now have 3 hotels within Heathrow that have taken on a large number of asylum seekers. Any children that are arriving as part of that, we still have a duty to try and provide those social care services to them. So we have seen that general increase, and although a child is UASC, they're immediately looked after child, so they fall within our remit. And the Home Office has increased funding in relation to the grants or asylum grants that come in, and that is sufficient to cover the cost of placements. But where we're seeing the gaps forming is particularly to do with the high level of age assessments that we've had. In previous years we've had maybe 10, I think 2 years ago 6 last year, and so far this year we've had 60. So it's a completely different environment than we've had before. So that is leading to additional cost pressures, but I believe that's been dealt with, not been dealt with, but it has certainly been raised at a strategic and political level, because it is a much wider issue for all port authorities. But that's the impact it's having on Hillingdon. Does that cover? Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Tuckwell.
I'll have to pay my fine. It's not really a question, it's more sort of set of observations really that I think that just sort of subbing on this committee, so I thought I'm probably going to get an update on the select committee that I sit on normally, but I thought I'd just make some observations. So I think the first thing is it's a strong, well-constructed proposal, I think, for this particular remit. It deals with the demand-led pressures, which we've talked about with the various agenda items tonight. Particularly good to see that the growth in send has been recognised. Totally understand the COVID pressures and the amount of uncertainty that sits around that. But we've got investment in schools and investment in infrastructure. So I think, whilst we have got some good scrutiny going on with other difficulties, I think it's a well-constructed and balanced proposal that I certainly welcome anyway. So that's just my observation.
Thank you, Councillor.
I'll bring you in for one further question, Councillor speaking.
Well, it's going into details rather than general. The items under our remit that are going to be cut or saved or whatever phrase you want to use include libraries, reduction by 250k, early years by 100k, and then the fees going up in music, etc. Can you be a bit more specific about what actually these reductions in funding will mean for libraries and early years? And what are we talking about with cultural 39k additional fees? What does that entail?
Okay. In terms of the savings that are there and that are put forward, I think the libraries programme has been subject to bid review, and we've been working very closely with the service over about the past year to really have a look at what that provision should be, and looking at what happened during COVID and actually the changing people's behaviour during COVID as well. So Borough Box has been incredibly popular, so that's obviously something that we would want to continue and to support. I think when we're looking at libraries, and the review is still underway, so everything is open, and if we're looking to use libraries as that real community place that they are, then we need to consider with all council assets how we're best using them and how we're maximising the use of that space. So how can we maximise the offer that is being delivered out of those libraries, and particularly when we do look at co-locating services, for example, that can lead to savings and efficiencies on that front. So that's, as I say, it's still a work in progress in terms of that review. Proposals will come back later. The early years operating model has been reviewed and continues to be reviewed over a number of years, probably for about the past 4 years when we've looked at that model. So previously it was supported by the DSG, and there was grant funding from DSG that was put forward into early years centres. That stopped, and then since that point we've been very much looking at how we can make it as efficient as it possibly can be. The key areas that we review are predominantly staffing and income. So there's recently been a restructure of that area, and although it's changed the structure of the service as a whole, it's also put in place, I can't remember the job title exactly, but it's like a business services manager type role, so it's really to that promotion side, because although we are a council, we need to be running those in a slightly more commercial manner, because they are funded through the income that we're receiving. With regard to the fees and charges, I think with the cultural services, I would have to take a look at it. What we have in terms of the fees and charges schedule, I have it open in front of me, and it's 88 pages long, and it's full of a whole manner of things. Libraries, for example, charges for things like photocopying. So it will be made up of was going to say a million small things. I can't say that it's a million of them, but a lot of small things that are making up that figure. But I think it was in the schedule in the meeting that was the cabinet meeting, or the council meeting, sorry, in December. If not, it will be certainly available as part of the February council meetings.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, I'm looking around the room. No one seems to be indicating beyond that. Just a few observations from me then. I mean, I concur very much with what Councillor Tuckwell has said. I mean, it's a year since I sat at the very top table, but I must admit our approach to sound finance sort of remains very much in place. I'm pleased to see that 4.7 million at the end of the MTFF period is actually a darn sight better than I've seen actually for a long time. So yes, there are uncertainties, absolutely, some quite big ones. However, I think we can welcome, or certainly on this side, we welcome the investment that's going into services. They're demand-driven services. These are the two biggest spending portfolios on the council. They're demand-driven. We have to respond. We can't just draw a bridge and say no more services. So we have to manage that. And I think what's important here is it's not about cuts. It's about how we change the way we deliver services. We have to deliver more with less. It's been the name of the game for years. It really has, certainly since 2010, without a doubt. So I would judge things in terms of the day-to-day experience of the service user, not what's actually being spent, because we do have to get that right. I welcome very much the capital expenditure that's coming forward in terms of special educational needs. We know how important that is. And also, I'll be going back to the transformational side. I mean, we're hearing about the a new mental health pathway. We're hearing about the work of the Stronger Families programme. And, of course, the work of our major review, which will bear fruit moving forward. So there are lots of positives there. Yes, it's not easy. Yes, there are uncertainties. Now, in terms of comments to Cabinet, noting what Councillor Prince has said, I hadn't actually prepared anything earlier to present. What I'm minded to suggest is that we take the matter offline if the committee is minded to support that, to see if Councillor Prince and I can agree a form of wording. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but I'm happy to do that. But at that point, Councillor Prince is indicating, so I'll ask her to comment.
Thank you. Yes, ideally we'd be able to agree a response that goes to Cabinet, but in the instance that we cannot, we would like to request that we submit minority group comments if the committee agrees, if we cannot agree. Well,
it's always within your gift to submit minority comments. I mean, I would much prefer us to speak with one voice as a committee, but I fully accept it's your right and privilege to do that if you wish. My feeling on this is let's see if we can come up with a form of words that's acceptable on both sides. If we can't, then obviously you must go your own way, and that's fair enough. But I suggest we do that tonight. There's plenty to reflect on here, and that seems to be the most sensible way ahead. So I think perhaps if the committee is, if that's acceptable to the committee, that the matter is delegated to myself and Councillor Prince to consider the question of comment to Cabinet, then that's fair enough. Anisha, you want to comment?
Sorry, Chairman, if we can add also in consultation with Democratic Services so that I can put those forward for the committee.
Let's make sure we get that bit in as well. Okay, fine. Okay, well, look, we've had some good debate around that. I mean, this is a process. It is a consultation. Things we're uncertain about. There's obviously much more discussion to be had. So let's thank the officers for their contributions this evening and for their work. A tremendous amount of work goes into this, and it's no easy job. So thank you for that. Look forward to our separate discussion offline, Councillor Prince, and more discussion, no doubt, at full council in due course. Thank you very much. Are the recommendations agreed then? Thank you.
Agreed, and I thank you very much because I know that officers have been extremely busy on the issue of the high needs issue, and that's taken so much of your time. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, so thank you, Gemma. Thank you, Dan. Lovely. So we'll move on. So we come now to the item of the major review, assisted living technologies. It seems a while now, doesn't it, since we first looked at this, and it's come and gone. It's had a few turns, but last time round you recall that I put forward some ideas that could be worked into recommendations, and we all agreed those. What's come back is a a slightly reworked version of what was put forward that we agreed last time. What's been circulated separately are very, very slight amendments to what was there. Let me explain that, if I may. Point 11, recommendation 11, is a new one. And that is really designed to convey that what we've always meant to say, and I think we said it all the way through, this is not something we're doing to supplant face-to-face human contact. This is to augment and develop the offer and strengthen the offer in many ways, and that's really what we're talking about. Now, that may have been implicit, but we thought it should be explicit, really, as part of what we're putting forward. Other very, very minor wording changes in the recommendations, which are really style, not substance. It's personal preference, that's all. So we've put it all into one document. So, any comments on that? Can we, I think, but actually, before I ask for comments, just maybe explain the next thing then. So this will come back to us in the February meeting, I think. I think Democratic Services will work up the report recommendations. I'll need to write an explanatory forward for it. It comes to us in February. If there are any final tweaks at that stage, then that can be delegated to myself and the Labour lead, and then it comes to committee in March. So that's really the order of events moving forward. So I suppose the question is, are we happy with these recommendations as they've been slightly reworked? Any comments on them at all?
Sorry, Chairman. So once the report comes to committee in February, if the committee is happy with it, at that stage they can approve the report and agree it. If there are minor changes, delegated authority can be provided to Labour lead and Chairman and myself to make the changes, and it's hoped that this report will then go to Cabinet, make the Cabinet meeting in March. However, this is dependent on the outcome of discussions and how members feel about the report when it's presented in February.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be disappointed if there are massive changes, quite frankly, given what we've done, but you never know, do you? So, okay, are we happy with what's been tabled then, in terms of these recommendations? Okay, so thank you very much for that. That's agreed. We'll look forward to seeing you again, probably for the last time on this item next time round, Darren. And thank you for your input. Thank you for your input as well and for your help on that. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. So we now come to agenda item 11. I think we're on to the work programme. It's looking a little bit sparse for April. I guess some of us will be thinking about other things around about that time. However, we have got the public health contract to come at that point, which is an important one. And there's every chance that one or two of these may possibly slip from February or March, given the workload at the moment. So I think that's likely to be beefed up a little bit by the time we get there. Any comments on the work programme for anyone? No? Okay. Is the recommendation agreed? Thank you. And finally, agenda item 12, the Cabinet Forward Plan. Any comments or questions on that? Okay. Recommendation agreed? Thank you very much. That concludes our meeting. And I thank you all for your input. I think we had some good debates this evening around the various matters we were talking about. No doubt it will carry on, but thank you very much for the night. Thank you.